as originally conceived, it was meant not as a panel to debate the issues, but rather offer some reflections about the whole conference. May I begin by saying that several years ago there appeared in Poland 5 volumes of the history of Polish diplomacy. And more recently this was summarized into 1 volume. But even with that, I do not think that we have really a synthesis of Polish foreign policy over the centuries. And in a sense, the idea of this conference was to make a step in this direction. We are not trying to resolve, or it was not the intention of us to try to resolve any problems, but rather to reflect on some of the questions. A few reflections which I'd like to offer would be along the following lines. Listening to the various presentations, the question comes up to one's mind, has there been a continuity or a lack of continuity of Polish foreign policy over the centuries? Obviously, conditions were changing, and a direct continuity would be very difficult. In a rather extreme statement, which I like to quote because it is that provocative, by Gawroński at the time when he was Polish minister and envoy to Vienna in the 1930s, Gawroński says, "It has been the tragedy of Poland that it never had a foreign policy worthy of that name. Brak polityki zagranicznej był tragedią naszych dziejów." Now, it seems to me that apart from everything else, listening to the first few remarks or observations from Professor Sisson, Professor Konrad, Professor Nowak, we see how complex the question of foreign policy of Poland was over the centuries. The one thing which struck me was the fragmentation of the decision-making power and the multiplicity of questions which the state had to deal with. Apart from the divisions which were mentioned here already, the problems of religion and multi-ethnic, etc., we may remember that in the first Polish Republic, in the Commonwealth, in the Respublika, there were in fact 4 foreign policy dignitaries: the Chancellor of Lithuania, who dealt with the problems of Rus, Chancellor of the Crown, which dealt with the problems, the hetmans who dealt with the problems of the Tatars, and so forth. So it is extremely difficult to pass judgment not only over the whole period or whole span of Polish foreign policy, but without taking into account the extreme complexity of it. This is one of the questions which occurred to me. Another one was, and I've already cited Louis Eisenman, the French historian, saying that it has been a misfortune for Poland to be reborn as a state which was too small to be a power and too large to be satisfied with the status of a satellite. I think that this is a very apt, a brief description of the situation of the interwar period, and obviously it added to the complexity of dealing with the issues, the German, Russian or the German-Soviet issue. Professor Brzezinski may be right in saying that Poland has never had as favorable strategic position. I wouldn't quite agree with that. I think that in the 16th century the strategic position wasn't so bad, and that cooperation among Central European states is not a novelty of the 20th century, but the Jagiellonians practiced it fairly effectively in the 16th for a short time. We'll see how the Visegrad develops. When I think of the present-day problems of Poland, of being between, I do not mean that there are 2 different options, a NATO option or an American option or a European option. I simply mean that Poland has to engage once again in a certain balancing act which is difficult at times, and which at times is not, I would say, played at the best possible way. Here I disagree with Brzezinski that about the Polish decision to support the United States of Iraq. And I think that it would have been much wiser to play a very cautious role, sitting on the fence, not trying not to antagonize Germany. This was one of the reasons why the German-Polish relations have deteriorated, and not obviously antagonize the United States. So this is the question at times of moderation and of the feeling that, which was mentioned by the French historian, that the Poles still are not quite sure what category of states they belong to. There is the nostalgia about being a greater power than Poland actually is. You must have noticed that when one speaks of the new states, so-called, joining, it is always stressed that Poland is the biggest of the states. There is this, it may not be parochialism, I don't want to play with words, but there is this certain tendency, which I would call nostalgic tendency, historic tendency of trying to assert one's position, and at the same time being extremely sensitive to criticism. Here I would agree with Brzezinski, and I would like to draw your attention to a series of very interesting articles which appeared in the last issue of Tygodnik Powszechny by Germans and by Poles, dealing with the German-Polish syndrome and trying to analyze the reasons for the recent deterioration and expressing hopes for some kind of very slow change, with the feeling that a drastic change for the better is not very likely. In the same way, I would like to draw your attention to an issue of the Kraków Arcana, of which Dr. Nowak is their editor, which deals with Polish-Russian aspects. And there is an article of Professor Andrzej Walicki. He is very often going against the current, in which he tries to say, well, let's not be offended all the time by what the Russians do. Let's try to be a little less sensitive. In American politics, the argument often is, or an accusation often is against a politician, that he has too thin a skin. Well, I'm afraid that on occasion it would help the Poles to have a little thicker skin. This is another observation. I don't believe, in the same way in which I said that in the interwar period, the Polish position nowadays is in 100 times better than it was then. We all realize that. No territorial issue with Germany, difficulties with Russia, which are bound, I think, to continue as long as the age-long contest over the influence of the border area, Ukraine, Russia, is likely to continue in one form or another. I don't see this disappearing, but I hope that it will be handled with a certain amount of moderation and not the desire to reply any time something appears in the Russian press or statement which is offensive, to reply giving tit for tat. I don't think this is very good diplomacy. And these are my observations at this point. I would like to turn to our colleagues.
Thank you very much. We were asked to comment on possible continuations and even actualities of some elements of Polish foreign policy throughout centuries. And it seems to me that one element needs to be treated as still valid. The fact that Poland is positioned in a very special way, opened to the east of Europe. And it was positioned this way through its union with Lithuania, union to various, some of them really beneficial, some of them maybe detrimental, contacts with Eastern European problems. But still, if we look now on the map of the European Union, we have to admit one thing that makes Polish position really special, and there is nothing parochial in it. The fact that this is the only country of the EU that has common border with all three post-Soviet Slavic republics, the only one country. Lithuania borders only with Belarusia and Russian Federation. Latvia only with Belarusia and Russia. Estonia only with Russia. And Hungary and Slovakia have a common border only with Ukraine. So Poland is unique in this respect in all the European Union, and this makes her responsible to some extent, of course. I wouldn't say that Poland is solely responsible for Eastern policy of the European Union, but is naturally or geopolitically, if you will, predetermined to have some initiative in this respect. And there we have some problems that reminds us some historical problems too, problems from our history. When Professor Harashimowicz presented this contrast, I would say that this contrast seemed to me really too sharp between old good days of Professor Skubiszewski's rule and what happened afterwards. I would say that part of this contrast might be contributed to a real belief that history had ended at that time, not only in Poland, but most of all in, I would say, general mood, political mood in the European Union project as well. Russia didn't pose, I would say, new Russia didn't pose a real threat to the EU project at that time. President Yeltsin was occupied with his internal fight for power and couldn't, I would say, express and even more so enforce any re-imperializing projects on Russian neighbors. Afterwards, it changed really dramatically, especially in past 5 years when Russia reintegrated herself to some extent around a model that unfortunately is based not on stable and democratic, because I would agree perfectly with Professor Harashimowicz's statement that for Poland the best situation to the east is stable and democratic Russia, but from Russian perspective it is not and, but either or, either stable or democratic. This is how Putin presents the situation to his own people, and what we can ascertain along sociological different data we got from Russian Federation now, most of the population agrees with this, either stable or democratic. And this makes a real problem. We cannot overcome this with simple words that we like to have stable and democratic Russia. It is not the way Russia exists, and we have to deal with it. We can hope for the change. We can do anything we can imagine not to make an obstacle to the change in this favorable, I would say, outcome, towards this favorable outcome in Russia. But now we have to deal with real situation, which is that Russia is not democratic and is stable. And at the same time, this stabilized Russia, stabilized under totally authoritarian regime of President Putin, has its own political agenda that is very much contrary not only to Polish agenda, but to the European Union agenda of exporting democracy towards the East. So we don't have one project, the European Union project in Eastern Europe, but we have two projects. The European Union project that was extolled in a very much justified way by Professor Harashimowicz, but we have to take into account that there is another project, Russian project of re-imperialization. And here is the problem, how we could deal with it, just not to spoil this relatively good situation we have now, and to enhance stability in Eastern Europe by changing, I would say, Russian relations to Russian European neighbors, I mean to Ukraine and to Belarus. There is on Russian agenda a reunification of Belarus and Russia. So we have to tackle with this problem. This was not invented by Professor Brzeziński. This is political fact that is going on our eyes. So what we can do about this? Can we appeal to the EU, to Brussels, where our appeals most of the time find deaf ears to this kind of appeals as stemming from Polish Russophobic, I would say, position, parochial Russophobic position, or we can do something on this. I would say that it seems to me that the idea presented here by Professor Brzeziński seems to me very appealing and the only, I would say, realistic. We have to find allies within the European Union to make our voice on Eastern European problems much more stronger, much more persuasive, and free of this accusation of Polish parochialism. What do I have in mind? Germany first, of course, I would agree. Without Germany it wouldn't be possible. But it is possible only now, after the most outspoken ambassador of Russian interests has gone. I mean Chancellor Schroeder. He realized really the most extravagant Russian interest within the EU. So now the change for Angela Merkel is really a great chance for Poland. If we miss this chance, this will be a real calamity of our foreign policy. I would agree then with every critical remark on our contemporary government if it misses this chance. This is really very important to start new phase of not only reconciliation but of real collaboration with Germany now in order to avoid what became a reality also, a real collaboration between Russia and Germany over our heads, which was not co-equal to Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, of course, but was detrimental to Polish interests, of course, too. But Germany is not alone as our, I would say, possible ally in this respect. Of course, all Scandinavian countries are also very important in this respect, and we shouldn't neglect bilateral, I would say, relations, believing that the EU is I would say, the final answer for all our political problems. No, we have to strengthen our position within the EU through finding allies and alliances within the EU. So we can find them as regards Eastern European questions in Sweden. That helps very much Estonia and Latvia. In, of course, Finland the same way, Denmark, and one of the examples that can be used in this respect is delicate but stable and consequent pressure on Germany within the EU to withdraw from this really detrimental project of the pipeline down under the Baltic Sea, which really makes a great source of stress not only for Poles but also for Estonians, Finns, and other, I would say, Baltic people. So we are not alone in this respect. We have to find partners, not to be alone in our Eastern policy. This is something really important. And we have to renew what was rightly stressed by Mr. Ambassador here, our regional policy in Central Europe. to reinvigorate our cooperation with Czech Republic, with Slovakia, with Hungary, and other, I would say, post-communist countries that would also take the same risk with destabilization of our eastern border, and we have to persuade them, which wouldn't be, I believe, so impossible, that we share a very similar position within the EU, being on its eastern, so to speak, outskirts. Though Poland is, however it sounds maybe parochial or naive, predetermined to be the most outspoken, I would say, ambassador of these Eastern European problems within the EU. And this is part of our historical legacy and part of our still valid geopolitical position. Thank you.
Sir,
Yeah, okay,
can
so-
I say one word? Please,
Yeah.
do not export democracy by force. We have a very bad experience with Iran.
Sorry, but no one was saying this, so
No,
I don't know.
You are saying that you will force some democracy on Russia. This was your, I think it was something like this, but...
Okay, I didn't say that.
I just wanted to warn, don't force anything.
Yes.
Actually, I have nothing against this pipeline between Russia and Germany. I hope they will be the largest pipeline in the world, with a huge pipe. But personally, I'm looking for the new foreign economic policy in Poland, because this is really the biggest problem in Poland's economy and corruption, the largest in the world. We have a low economy and we have the largest in the world corruption. So actually, I'm looking for some kind of new development in economic bilateral relations for the countries that EU, Russia, and someone outside the world. They will be strong economy and independent and mature and completely mature.
We have certainly not the largest corruption in the world. That's the most exaggerated statement one can make.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yes, look, I would like to compare the question of Iraq. Professor Brzezinski said that he, as we know, he doesn't agree that it was proper for the United States to do this, but he saw advantage for Poland to go along. I agree with Professor Vantage, but I'm not sure that it's really the case. Well, I can also put it in a little stronger terms. That was actually a criminal act of unprovoked aggression go to Iraq. And the American public is slowly waking up to that and realizes what most of the other observers of the scene realize, that that war was really bamboozled for the United States by the pro-Israeli neocons who to a large extent control American foreign policy and mass media. Now, as this war looks like goes into its disastrous end, the United States is going to wake up with its hands in a nightclub, as Polish saying, which is z ręką w nocniku. And my question to panelists is twofold. First of all, is Poland going to wake up with its finger in the nightclub along with the United States? Second, what do you think? Why Polish leadership, both former fascist president and also potential Donald Tusk, apparently support that Poland's involvement in that adventure? What are the real motives against the public opinion?
I think that both of us can answer that very briefly or speculate on it. I can say, as far as my own position is concerned, it was best expressed in a letter sent to Tygodnik Powszechny some time ago, in which I cited the famous lines from Wojciechowski, gdzie tylko nie było potrzeba, wszędzie się polski ułam pchał. And I tried to draw a certain comparison between the Polish Legia Nadwiślańska in Spain, helping Napoleon to liberate and to democratize Spain. So that my position on that is completely clear, and I think that the policy of the American government And Dr. Brzezinski was very diplomatic today, but less diplomatic in an article which appeared in Herald Tribune, in which he really let himself go, and which he spoke of the suicidal policies. Now, as for the reasons or the motivation of the Polish government, I'm not in a position to say that, so perhaps you might want to.
I just want to share with you information. You probably know that Polish public opinion were not, but while supporting U.S. generally, were against war in Iraq.
That's what I said.
Yeah,
So why
yeah. So
that
this I
went along
said
with
that.
the United States?
Yeah.
Excuse me, but actually I would like to correct it. The Polish public opinion was not overwhelmingly against, as in Spain or as in France or as in Germany. That was almost even 50-50 situation, so it is very risky to say that Polish public opinion was overwhelmingly against and that Polish government and Polish president acted against. You can... Sorry?
Majority was
Correct.
Yes, but majority measured by polls, especially in Poland, is not a very, I would say, accurate number usually. So I would answer only maybe slightly a different way to your question. It seems to me, though I am no spokesman to especially President Kwaśniewski, still I presume that he intended to get something for it, and he got nothing. That's the problem. That's the problem.
Free visa.
And I would compare the situation maybe not to Polish Legia Nadwiślańska in Spain, but there is much closer comparison to Polish Legia Nadwiślańska in Haiti.
Yes.
The question was about the motivation of the Polish government. I think it should be somehow responded. But let me start with remark. I think what we are doing right now is what can be described in Monday morning overmaking. I mean, we easily put this situation in Iraq out of the context, which was 2 years ago. And let me just remind you that there was a bitter controversy among the international community about the threat assessment that the regime of Saddam Hussein posed to it, and that a good part of that was convinced that the threat was real. But to me, the primary motivation was to demonstrate that that Poland is an ally that you can trust. There was a situation where the United States desperately needed allies, and our understanding of the alliance is that this is a two-way street. If we want to count on the United States as an ally, we have the obligation, to be trustful ally too. So I would say that there was a clear strategic choice of a partner with whom Poland wants to build its position on the international scene.
Okay, so I propose we take last question.
Yes, we heard several statements about the need not to rub Russia too much the wrong way and not to be offended if Russian officials, the president, offends others. And this, in other words, the Russian aspect has not been clarified. So may I say a few things on that? The first that was said about Mr. Putin is that the balance between stability and democracy will do you one. Mr. Putin went much further. He said, Russia will be great or it won't be. And in line with this approach, he said also several times, Russia will be governed centralized because it was governed like that during the Tsarist period in the Soviet period, and it has to be done in our period. So Mr. Putin's view has another European, he has also a European conception, or several European conceptions. One European conception is the Eurasian conception, which should be expanded as in which Russia will play the center role. It is for historians of some interest to know that this conception, Eurasian conception, was invented by very respectable non-communists in emigration in Prague. The Knyaz Trubetskoy and other significant Russian thinkers invented the conception of Eurasia, which is today the official policy of the Russian government. So Russia has its own conceptions of how to deal with Europe. It was not successful, but it had played the Entente card, France, Germany, Russia. That this would be a better European conception. And it has a number of others. And Russian government under President Putin has rudely interfered in a number of democratic elections. Ukraine comes to mind. We remember how Russian President Putin walked into the Ukraine several times and pointed who the next president should be. Let's see, we say all nasty things, really nasty things about President Bush's behavior. How would it be if he went to Mexico and told the Mexicans whom to elect for a president? Not only liberals, but even conservatives would be greatly dismayed. So we cannot, we should, it's a very delicate problem, but we should balance steadfast, resolute approach to Russia with not rubbing the Russians the wrong way.
Thank you.
Something I
another second last question. Yeah.
I just wanted to very briefly repeat something which Professor Chinchawa actually said in a completely different context and earlier in the day, and that is the importance of energy supplies. None of the two major conflicts that we have been talking about and disagreeing about, the Iraq War or German-Russian rapprochement over gas, would be conceivable if the major powers of the Western world were energy independent. Therefore, it is a most non-Polish and non-parochial and general aim of both the European Union and the United States to aim for energy independence. Were that to be solved, many of these other things would appear to be second-rate and would go away.
Yeah, so that was no oil in Bosnia. Yeah, how it takes so long to intervene.
Just two short things on continuity I just want to bring to our attention.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think they came up. One is specific relation with the Vatican and Rome, which I don't think we've dealt with, which comes for a long period of Poland's relation as a Catholic country and because of the unique situation of John Paul II has reemerged historically. So it's a long continuity issue. The second is Poland's special relationship with Turkey. The only society which looked to Turkey as a point of liberation and to a degree orientalized from Turkish models. And today I understand is one of the more favorable societies towards the acceptance of Turkey into the European community. So I think those are two issues of long-term continuity worth looking at.
John, close the session.
I'd be happy to. Boy, I'm delighted to be here. And for those of you who have been here since 9 o'clock in the morning, my thanks. You have more Sitzfleisch than I do. For those of you who came later in the day, thank you for coming. This event was made possible by a number of organizations who interact occasionally in different areas. Of course, the Pilsudski Institute, the Semper Polonia Foundation, and the Polish Senate, which sent money across the Atlantic to help us. The Polish Studies Program, which is funded by the Polish-Slavic Federal Credit Union, the Kościuszko Foundation, our great source of support, And right now, I can't imagine how many more institutions, but I can tell you that this is not the last time we will be doing a meeting like this. I think it will be difficult to top this in the sense that we had a number of very good specialists and a keynoter who really, I think, gave people some ideas to bounce their ideas off. The next conference that we will be doing in the spring will probably have to do with Visegrad, and will not have an exclusively Polish focus, but will have a Ukrainian focus in which Poland will play, of course, a very great role. Now, none of this would have been possible without the exacting and really tough work of Dr. Iwona Drąg-Korga, who's sitting in the back, the director of the Pilsudski Institute. And my colleague, my Lithuanian colleague, Kevin Hallinan, who still made the arrangements, even though he's still angry about General Żelegovsky taking Vilnius in 1920. And I think he'll forgive us if we won't mention it to him anytime in the near future. I now invite one and all to a reception here in the lobby. Let's go have a little schnapps and a nosh. Thank you.